Hey everybody, thanks again for joining us for another edition of Advancement Live. My name is Ryan Catherwood and I am coming to you live from the grounds of the University of Virginia here in Charlottesville, Virginia. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, thank you so much. Advancement Live airs twice a month on the second and last Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Advancement Live is part of the HigherEdLive network, which is a series of professional development web shows. Also podcasts, which you may be familiar with already, but if you have not listened to the podcast, you can download the app from iTunes or go to higheredlive.com and do the same. Be part of our broadcast, of course, by tuning in live to the back channel. If you use the hashtag HigherEdLive during the course of the broadcast, we will be monitoring that, and you can ask questions to our panelists today. And finally, be sure to subscribe to the HigherEdLive newsletter by going to the higheredlive.com website. Let me begin the show by introducing our excellent sponsors. iModules is one of our fantastic sponsors, and they have their annual user conference called Sizzler, which is a 3-day event for networking, sharing, and learning industry best practices, and you can join over 500 higher education professionals representing more than 225 organizations. That conference is coming up the end of July, July 27th through the 30th in Overland Park. And also, a sponsor of Advancement Live are our good friends at M. Stoner. The show is produced by M. Stoner, in fact, which is a marketing and communications firm that works with educational institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. And introducing my next guest, that notion of running your own shop at your alma mater runs true with my next guest, Lisa Lee. Lisa has served as the Director of Alumni Relations at Swarthmore College, her alma mater, for almost 14 years now. Prior to Swarthmore, she was the graduate admissions at Duke University Fuqua School of Business, and then the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, and then the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. She holds a Master's of Education from Boston University. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. And in our pre-show call, we talked a little bit about your communication strategy, getting folks to the awareness factor built up in advance of the event. And one of the things that you guys deployed was the use of a hashtag well in advance of reunion weekend. Can you talk a little bit about that decision, and did it really spark the digital engagement that you were looking for?
Sure, it did. So this year is Swarthmore's sesquicentennial, so it's our 150th birthday. So we decided well in advance that we wanted a hashtag that could be used for all sesquicentennial events, and that's SWAT150. And so what that meant was by the time reunion arrived, our alums had been seeing that hashtag for 6 months already, so it meant there was some familiarity. And then once they arrived on campus, we had signs and with the hashtag and encouraging people to share their photos and their memories with the hashtag. So yes, it was very useful for us.
Fantastic. And as you alluded to, this was your sesquicentennial reunion, which is a very difficult thing to say.
Yes, you have to practice a lot.
Practiced it, yeah. And so I actually practiced a few times before our segment. So how did this milestone year for you guys impact your event marketing strategy when it came to the emails and the social media? Obviously, you put together a sort of specialized package for this year. We
did, and one of the reasons for that is that the sesquicentennial, we took the opportunity of the sesquicentennial to have an all-alumni reunion weekend. And we always invite all of our alums, but this year we really wanted people from all class years to come. And as it happens, we ended up with 72 different years represented. We ended up with 1,000 more people than we've ever had before on campus for reunions. So that was a big driver in our marketing. One of the things that meant was that people who were in non-milestone classes, who, as I said, do sort of get invited every year, we needed to really reach out and sort of explain to them this really was for them. We really meant for them to attend. So that was a big piece of our marketing, and as part of that, we put together online a couple of things. We put a section called Why I Come Back with alumni stories. we put a top 10 list of reasons to come back, one of which was, this is your opportunity to see people, not just from your friends, not just from your class, but the years before, the years after that you know and you don't always see at reunion weekend. And once those were put together, we used them heavily in our email marketing. We used them in our tweets. We used them as part of a draw. And it was something that our volunteers could use as we reached out to them to encourage people to attend. So we had, not only the regular activity volunteers for the milestone reunions, but we reached out to volunteers from non-milestone reunions and to the 500 current and former alumni council members. And they had those as talking points and things they could send out on social media. We also, because it was our sesquicentennial, were able to use some things that have been put together for that. So we have a timeline, we have interesting facts, we have a list of rules of conduct that a much earlier president had put together, and those are things that we were able to share within our marketing that weren't specific to reunion, but were about Swarthmore and Swarthmore memories that we could use as we started putting things together.
Yeah, exciting time for you guys. And then, of course, everyone arrives, and you have a university full of revelers, and there is an additional marketing and communication strategy that happens during the course of the actual event, while the event is happening. Can you talk about a little bit what you guys did in order to provide an engagement opportunity during the event? Certainly.
Well, one of the things that we did is we used a social media aggregate that was called SWAT Social, and that was created by one of our young alums named Joel Price, and he is in our information technology office, and he put this together, and it aggregates in a really nice visual way all of the different places where photos are posted and tweets are going out with the hashtag SWAT150, and so we were able, and that's live, so we were able to show that in our registration lobby, so people could watch as they were going through, and that created some energy for them to go out and post their photos. There you go. You can see a couple of our reunion workers. That's the lobby where people are registering. So that's one of the things we can do. That is flexible. It's customizable. We used it for Alumni Weekend, but you could just as easily use it for something for admissions or some other part of the campus if you wanted to do that. In addition to that, the folks in communications who were everywhere over the course of the weekend doing a fabulous job, and they started strategizing really early about what their plan was, and they decided that they really wanted to flood the campus with tweets, that they wanted to get a lot of enthusiasm go that way, but they also wanted to be involved in Instagram, to be involved in Facebook, but on a much smaller scale. They didn't want to flood everyone's feeds with that. So they limited the photos that they put on Instagram and Facebook to a small number that they thought would be particularly meaningful to alums, and then they had a lot more activity on Twitter, and then they retweeted and they resent things, and they went out to each of the key events, in any of the sort of primary events, and then they came back together over the course of the weekend every 2 hours to talk about what they'd seen and to give content for whichever platform each of them was working on that they could share via their platforms, and then they go away again, come back 2 hours later, so that they could be very consistent about that.
That's amazing, and it makes a lot of sense. When you were analyzing which of the platforms seemed to get the most traction, I know that you mentioned Instagram perhaps used a little bit less than Twitter, which was used quite a bit more, both in advance of the event and then during the reunion weekend itself. Did you notice any patterns, and what was traffic like as you were driving it to your website?
Sure. Well, what I was talking about there was the traffic we actually put out on those websites, and we made a decision to do less. But I think all of them were active. We went well above our expectations. We had 72 photos posted on Instagram that alums posted with the hashtag. We had 133 tweets with the hashtag, and sort of what we were particularly pleased about with that was that there were 53 different alums included in that number, most of whom had not been involved in our social media platform before. The most popular photo that we had that was liked and retweeted was a photo of a woman from the class of 1934 celebrating her 80th reunion, and she led the parade. So she's 100 years old. She led our parade, and that's the one that got the most likes and the one that sort of got passed around the most. The one that seems to be the one that our alums took the most photos of and shared themselves was a photo of our 150th birthday cake on Sunday morning. So we were pretty pleased at the number of people who reached out and followed our program.
I bet that was a pretty special birthday cake. 150 years. It has to be pretty grand. So that's great. Those are great numbers, Lisa. And a lot of the, in the aftermath of any reunion, you're trying to think about some of the things that were the most successful. And based on sort of your accounts, what were those things? And perhaps do you have some recommendations for viewers watching the show as far as tips that might help them with their own communication strategy?
I think part of that was the fact that communications worked starting so very early. They engaged with us. We talked about what it is that we wanted to particularly highlight, particularly celebrate, and then they took that and ran with it. And so I think the preparation makes a huge difference. Anyone who's been at a reunion knows that it's just craziness. There's so many different activities happening all the time, and if you don't have a plan for it, it's easy to get distracted. And so I think that was really immensely important for us. We, as most schools, always use volunteers, and that's important to us as well. I think one of the things we learned this year was the power of volunteers who aren't necessarily in reunion years, but in particularly our closest volunteers, like our former council members, who, partly because they're very tightly connected to us and partly because it was such an important reunion year, milestone reunion for the college, who took the time to actually come in a year that wasn't necessarily their own milestone and bring people with them and encourage people to come with them. So the use of volunteers was important for us, and we sort of did that a little bit differently this year. And I guess going back to something from earlier, the programming question in terms of making sure all of your different classes are represented. We've often had a lot of smaller class-based activities